الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Introduction: Cardiovascular disease. This is part of non-communicable diseases, epidemiology and prevention, by Professor Mahmoud Hani Suleiman. With this lecture, I am going to begin a new part of the community medicine. It is about non-communicable disease. At the beginning, I would like to say the most important part of these lectures are the written part, and it is far enough if it contains anything which is not clear for you, please write me a question. I will collect these questions and try to answer them. I said this at the very beginning of these lectures, at lecture called Zero Lecture. Please, you can revise it, understand it, and do what I said in it. The lecture so-called Zero Lecture. I intend to make my voice neutral. So the important part of these lectures is the written text and the facts in the text that you need to use them in your clinic or hospital or office, whatever the position of you, or even in the exam, either oral, written, or clinical. Now I'll begin the introduction of non-communicable disease. There are facts in Egypt. Chronic diseases accounted for 78% of all deaths in 2002. See the coming chart. Total deaths in Egypt in this year were 495,000. Total deaths related to chronic disease in 2002 were 384,000. That is to say, most of the deaths were due to chronic disease. This is the importance of non-communicable disease in Egypt. As you see, cardiovascular disease accounted for 42%, communicable maternal and perinatal nutritional deficiencies accounted for 18%, other chronic disease 21%, chronic respiratory disease 5%, cancer 8%, diabetes 2%, injuries 4%. This shows the importance of non-communicable disease in Egypt, and this is the case in most countries. Importance of non-communicable disease in Egypt continued. The burden of non-communicable diseases is causing 84.7% of all deaths. Cardiovascular disease 46, cancers about 14, respiratory disease about 4, diabetes about 1.5 of all deaths. This is recently. As a result, about quarts of adults aged 30 and 70 years expected to die from one of four main non-communicable diseases. Around 18% of adolescents have ever smoked cigarettes, while about 48% live in homes where others smoke in their presence. And per adult capita consumption of alcohol is 0.4 liters of pure alcohol. The importance of non-communicable disease in Egypt continued. Prevalence of decreased physical activity in adolescence is 87%. This is high for decreased physical activity. Raised blood pressures in adults more than 18 years, about 25% of population. The relative of males and females are written. Obesity affects a third population. Third population are obese. This what we are going to discuss in non-communicable disease. The problem, then cardiovascular disease, then cancer, then obesity and obese mellitus, then accidents. We will not talk about eyes. Non-communicable disease differ from communicable disease in few important points. They are non-communicable. They do not have defined incubation period. These differences make it is somewhat difficult to make prevention and control. We can never tell when a person affected with insulin resistance will begin to show features of type 2 diabetes. Agents are vague, that is to say, multifactorial causation. Natural history, if often uncertain and unpredictable. Boundary between disease and non-disease is very blurry, slowly progressive, e.g. diabetes won't kill you quickly, it will slowly affect eyes, nerves, blood vessels, etc. Usually non-reversible. Non-communicable disease, usually non-reversible and permanent pathology. So most communicable diseases are not reversible, leave some residual disability. All this make difficulty, and rehabilitation is necessary. For example, diabetes will usually produce some disability, like blindness, stroke, and residual weakness over long term. Lag period is present between behavioral change and disease progression. There is gap between change of food habits, eating refined carbohydrate and fats, with the development of type 2 diabetes. This is an example. Regarding diabetes, one can have any one of obesity, metabolic syndrome, impaired fasting glucose, impaired glucose tolerance, insulin resistance, or frank diabetes. It's hard to say at exactly what point of time someone acquires diabetes. So if one have one of these problems, we cannot tell when he will have diabetes. This is a difficult problem. It is a problem of developed nations. Non-communicable diseases are rising in developing countries due to demographic transition, greater life expectancy, medical transition, and risk transition. Demographic transition, greater life expectancy. Medical transition, most people now survive a single myocardial infarction to suffer from a second. Risk transition, we are acquiring all the bad habits of the West. Epidemiology transition, why it makes difficulty. Epidemiologic transition theory proposed in 1971. This refers to relatively constant pattern of changes in disease pattern as societies develop. This equal age of degenerative and man-made diseases instead of age of epidemics and famine and age of receding pandemics. This table composed of 3 columns. The first column about age of pestilence, epidemics, and famines. was characterized by frequent epidemics and famines, endemic infections and parasitic diseases, chronic malnutrition, maternal and child health problems, serious environmental health problems, unsafe water, fecal waste contamination, insects and rodents, poor housing. The second column, it was the time of receding pandemics. Epidemics and famines somewhat reduced in frequency. People live long enough for heart disease and cancer to occur. Infection and parasitism somewhat reduced. Occupational health problems rise. It was the Industrial Revolution. Sanitation begins to improve. Urban health problems become acute. Accidents at home and in industry. The third column shows the times of degenerative diseases, which you are live in it now. It is characterized by morbidity overshadows mortality as the main issue. Chronic disease, mental illness, drug addiction, pollution rise in importance. Infectious disease, mainly in certain pockets of population, and emerging and re-emerging infection disease. Geriatric problems take over from MCH. Electrical or chemical hazards become main occupational health danger. Rising cost of medical care. In developing countries, I'm sorry to say, these three columns may come together. Now I will talk about cardiovascular diseases, epidemiology, prevention, and control. Of course, if you want a treatment of any of these diseases, look to the book of internal medicine. For example, circulatory disease are responsible for just over half deaths in US, and out of these diseases, a single one, atherosclerosis, accounts for 1 death out of 4. 1 death, about quarter of deaths. In today's world, most of diseases are due to non-communicable disease. This is worldwide. 32 million, and just over half of these are due to cardiovascular disease. Even in some developing countries, cardiovascular diseases became first or second cause of death. What is the problem? Cardiovascular diseases are number 1 cause of death globally. More dying annually due to cardiovascular disease than from any other cause. Second, about 17 million died from cardiovascular disease in 2004, representing about 30% of all global deaths. Of these deaths, about 7 million are due to CHD, and about 6 million due to stroke. Low and middle income countries affected. So 82% of CVD deaths take place in low and middle income countries and occur almost equally in men and women. CVDs place heavy burden on economics of low and middle income countries, because when you lost man or woman in productive life, you lost many years of training, you lose many years of production, which equal money. Heart disease, stroke, and diabetes estimated to decrease GDP between 1 to 5% in low and middle income countries, as many people die prematurely. CVDs changed how people think about disease. That is to say, they had a sizable impact on our social psyche. The present mortality rates from CVDs are consequences of previous exposure to behavioral risk factors. These are the risk factors for CVDs. Inappropriate nutrition, insufficient physical activity, increase in tobacco consumption. It is called the lag time. Summary of CVD's risk factors. When we say or discuss these risk factors, we are putting the items on which prevention and control plan may take over. Behavioral risk factors responsible for 80% of CHD and cerebrovascular disease. Over 300 risk factors associated with coronary heart disease and stroke. The major established risk factors meet three criteria: high prevalence, significant independent impact. Their treatment and control result in reduced risk. The major established risk factors for CHD meet three criteria: high prevalence in many populations, significant independent impact on risk of CHD or stroke. Their treatment and control result in reduced risk. Most risk factors of CHD planted in childhood, as getting addicted to refined carbohydrates and candy and soft drinks, and during adolescence, smoking and alcohol. Add to that millions of dollars spent on advertising for fast food. Major modifiable risk factors. Hypertension. So since they are modifiable, we can put them in the plan for prevention of these cardiovascular disease. So first one is hypertension, dyslipidemia, equal increased total cholesterol, increased LDL, and increased triglycerides. Smoking, obesity, unhealthy diet, which equal decreased fruit and vegetable and fish oils, increased saturated fat and refined carbohydrates. 6 diabetes mellitus, 7 physical inactivity. All these are modifiable. Continued modifiable risk factors: air pollution, which will lead to increased hospitalization, death due to CHD in elderly. These pollutants are nitrogen, lead, sulfur dioxide, and ozone. Other modifiable risk factors are lower socioeconomic class, alcohol, and increased lipoprotein, and psychosocial stress. So the other modifiable risk factors are lower socioeconomic class. Developed countries have become aware of cardiovascular risk. Most CVDs happens in middle to lower classes in developing countries. Increased consumption of alcohol, increased lipoprotein, and psychosocial stress. Non-modifiable risk factors: advancing age, family history, male sex. Novel risk factors: this is important because they are novel. Increased homocysteine in blood, abnormal coagulation due to increased fibrinogen, subclinical inflammation due to increased C-reactive protein. وفي النهاية أقول الحمد لله رب العالمين و thank you for your good listening.